Share a story about one of the culture shift successes you've had that you're just like, this was really fun to journey with this business and they did these great things and now they've got this outcome.
Yeah, I actually have two, so I'm going to break your rule and try and do two in the amount of time you were
Perfect.
expecting one. One is an agriculture client in Texas, and this is a company that's been around for 75 years. And when I met with the CEO, he was exhausted. He had been CEO, I think, at the time for about 7 or 8 years. And when we met, he said, similar to what I mentioned earlier, we're trying to head, we have to change this part of our business, and I know culture is part of it. A little bit later in our conversation, he said, Heather, I really gave a big new vision of this service area and this way we were going to focus on probably 6 or 9 months before he and I had our first conversation. And he said, he used this really lovely Band of Brothers quotes. And then he was saying, we're going to get out of the trenches and go together. And he said, then a couple of months later, I looked behind me and no one was following. And it was just this honest, stuck moment of passion towards the business, care about the people, and not sure how to make it all happen.
Welcome to the Exceptional Companies Podcast, a podcast for purpose-led entrepreneurs looking to master the art of buying, selling, or optimizing small businesses. Your host, Chris Seegers, founder of Exceptional Companies and author of Selling Main Street, has over a decade of experience starting, buying, and leading successful businesses. He's here to guide you through the complex world of business transactions and growth. Each week, we dive deep with actionable insights, expert interviews, and real-world strategies to activate and equip you to live exceptionally and build exceptional businesses. Now, let's dive into today's episode. Here's your host, Chris Seegers.
Welcome to the Exceptional Companies Podcast, where we discuss how to buy, grow, and eventually sell your small business. I'm joined today by Heather Smith, the CEO of Talent Elevated. Heather, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Chris. It's good to be here.
It's awesome. It's so great to have you here. It's been really fun to get to know you and understand your superpowers, which are really on the human resources and culture side. You help mid to large size organizations build incredible culture and just solve problems at a high level. So I'm really excited to have you here and see what we can share with our audience. So tell us your story. Tell us how you got into entrepreneurship, where you're from, some of your background, and how you started the business you're in.
Sure, absolutely. So I'm a West Texan, so I'm from Lubbock, Texas originally. You'll hear that a little bit in my voice probably as we go forward. And it's one of those things when I look back as I was starting my career right out of graduate school at 24 years old, I never would have thought that I'm where I am now. So my dream was to be a big corporate executive in the talent and learning space. I wanted to be a chief talent officer in a hospital system. When I fell out of graduate school, I didn't know that, but probably a year after that, I had the opportunity to work in our really amazing local hospital in Lubbock and was learning everything I possibly could about the human resources, specifically starting with recruiting and then employee relations and then learning and development. And as that grew, I thought, wow, I love leadership. I love leading people. I love the strategy and the difficulty of really solving the problem of how to help people love what they do and be equipped for what they do. So we moved our family to the corporate headquarters in 2018, which was south of Seattle, and I thought I'd made it. I really did. There's over 100,000 people. I was in charge of their development. I was leading a new center, building a new center of excellence. I had no idea what I was doing, but they took a chance on me, and I did that for about 3 years. And somewhere along that path, I really realized that that was not my path. I didn't want to be in a big business, and it was really pretty catastrophic for me because I am a goal-oriented person. If you would have asked me when I was little, I had some answer that was not a ballerina or a princess. I really was. At one point, I did say I wanted to be a CEO. My parents will tell me that I was probably 10 years old. I don't think I even knew what that meant. I think I thought those letters were cool and it sounded fancy. And so here I was at this incredible hospital system, really just an amazing job. I was on a path to chief learning and maybe talent officer, and I didn't like it. I couldn't interact with the people that I wanted to really make an impact. There were too many layers. There was too much. And I had a really great opportunity to interview some of the executives at that company on a video cast because I wanted to connect them to employees and talk about their path for a development opportunity for employees. So we're doing these learning videos, and 2 or 3 of them I was asking about their job at a complex health system. And the way they talked about the complexity and not really being able to shift things quickly, they had so much passion. And I thought, I do not have that passion for this. I want complexity, but I want to be able to see it move a little faster. I want to talk to the people that I'm impacting. So through a lot of prayer and a lot of conversations with my husband and just really trying to figure out what on earth could be next, really COVID was part of what changed where we were and how we thought about things. Just like many people shifted our perspective. We said we wanted to live closer to family in a beautiful place and do things that we absolutely love. So I started this business that is working with mainly small to mid-sized businesses on employee culture and really to help them change the way that work feels, because then when we do that, invariably business goals accelerate. My husband at the same time also said, hey, I want to shift careers. And so we really changed our world to try and create the space that we wanted to be in.
That's incredible. And that's exactly the journey that my wife and I were on as well, which was, I think COVID was either really terrible for you or the biggest blessing that you've had, or maybe a combination of both. But it really helped us think through, okay, if we don't have tomorrow, which is kind of how we should probably all be planning, what are the things we'd love to do? Where should we do it? We created our vivid vision and got cooking from there. I love that that happened and that you were able to move down here and kind of be a neighbor. But let's talk, okay, so you went from big company culture to small, growing your own business. You're doing really well. Your growth is tremendous. And I have a lot of respect for how you think about your own culture. But as you think about either coaching other business owners or just within your own business, how would you define culture?
So we have a pretty basic definition of culture. It's the shared attitudes, norms, behaviors, and beliefs amongst a group. And what's intriguing about that is that we help business owners and senior leaders to understand that culture is happening regardless of what you're doing about it, right? You and I, if we hang out enough together, we're going to have some shared attitudes and beliefs. We're going to have a rhythm of the way that we work. We're going to, if I have someone on my team that starts to have a bad attitude about certain kind of customers and they talk about it all the time, invariably I might be a little less excited for that customer to walk in the door, right? So these things start to bleed into one another because that's how groups of people start to evolve. That doesn't mean that we become exactly carbon copies of one another, but there are some shared attitudes or there's some shared beliefs or norms that happen amongst a team because they're the loudest folks on the team, or they're the just the rhythms that were created for the 10 years that this group was working all together and you came in as the newbie and you're kind of sucked into that. So that's how we talk about it and think about it, because what ultimately we're trying to accomplish is intentional culture, because you can shift the shared attitudes, norms, behaviors, and beliefs towards the things that are important to you and will help accelerate your business, but you have to be thoughtful and intentional about it.
That's really good. So let's think about intentional versus not intentional. So a lot of our clients, as we start talking through culture, they say, okay, here's our mission, here's our core values. And I'm like, okay, is this being lived out by, the majority of your people? Maybe not every day. And oftentimes the answer is no. We wrote this 10 years ago. And it's usually the same stuff, right? Honesty, integrity, really good stuff. But I'm like, hey, give me a story for how this is acted out in your business. And a lot of times there's crickets. So when you go into a business and you see, hey, you guys say you're this, but maybe you're this, and this isn't bad, but this is who you are. How do you help people reshape culture and be intentional? And how do you even track that?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's a lot of different pieces. So the first and foremost piece around this is that what's the mindset of the leaders at the top for how important this is. So a lot of times we'll find that the executive leadership team and CEO believe that you should have a mission, you should have a vision, you should have values. But often I think that we haven't had any role models in our business environments to really help us see, well, what so great that I have those. Does that help me recruit people? And is that enough? Does it help me to give reward and recognition, which often, interestingly enough, that's a tactical way that we'll say how you can hook values and what matters to employees together. So you reward and recognize based on a value. That's one of the things actually I learned at the hospital system back in Lubbock, that I watched that happen. We had these incredible values and action awards of nurses and doctors and support staff that were focused on the value of dignity, the value of service. I still remember those values because they were talked about and lived out each day. So I see the difference when I walk in and I say, well, how do you hold those? What do you do with them? And so part of that, the mindset is what matters, and then what could it be? So part of the key, I think, is to say, well, if you have these and you're really trying to work on this business goal, here's your vision. Often that's 3 to 5 years for folks. A lot of people are more at the 3-year mark than they used to be at the 5-year because business shifts so much. So 3 years from now, you're trying to accomplish the following. What will your value of integrity help you or hurt you if it's not lived out towards that business goal? And what starts to happen is this really interesting critical thinking. So first is mindset to go, oh, wow, if we operate this way, that's a differentiator to our competitors. Or that is a differentiator for the type of people that are going to continue to work here, not just come because of the values, but stay. And so we start to get the mindset. The second practical piece is to figure out where systemically this starts to show up. I was reading yesterday, and HBR just put out an article in August talking about culture is not about communications, it's about systems. So you have to build some systems to think about where does this show up. Recognition is one that I already gave. When you're communicating why a change, so we're rolling out a new technology, we are adding a new service line, we are changing the location of a building and different part of town we're going to service. Part of the why is because of our value of agility, we want to make sure that we're doing it in this way, and we may rent rather than buy, right? But people start to see that in your comms, so that's the second piece, and not necessarily in this order. Another piece that we do, and a lot of companies have either played with this or thought about it, but not necessarily instituted, it is a values-based decision-making model. So it's really a problem-solving model. So if you think about staying in the problem and really analyzing that, seeing who the impacts will be as you solve that problem, looking at multiple solutions, before you pick the solution and go to decision, you filter them through your values. And you say, well, if this decision, and sometimes those values seem like they might be in conflict with one another. And so you have to sit there and think through, well, if we made that decision, I have agility and I have integrity. This feels like that it could be really agile and move and momentum, but I don't know that that would be doing what we said we were going to do, or that might be really, we said that we were going to be integrous in this approach to the way that we serve our clients, and then when we do this, ultimately that service to clients goes away. So then you wrestle with that as a leadership team, and wherever you land on your solution, it's part of your story. We analyze this through our values. We see that these two are at a little bit of dissonance. Here's how we made the decision we did, because employees see it, even if they can't articulate why that feels off, they're struggling with that. So those are a couple of ways that we start to see values getting practical.
That's really good. And I hadn't seen that HBR article because you and I had talked about this probably 6 months ago on using EOS. And I've always said systems will define your culture either in a good way or a bad way. If you have a lack of systems, you won't have a culture. I mean, you'll have a culture, but it won't be necessarily the one you want, an intentional culture, like you said, because you're not measuring them. So if you say you have integrity, well, how are you measuring it? Do you have a scorecard around that? Do you have, like you said, a decision-making platform? And then the other piece that's really interesting to tie into this is with the systems, defining an impact scorecard. So I can't remember the book by Daniel Pink, but he really communicates on culture, and employees now really want, one of the top things that would keep them at a place is impact, is knowing what they are doing is important. And most business owners don't measure that. They're measuring financial impact and operational impact and client impact, but not necessarily, hey, the culture impact or the things that we're doing in this world to make it better. What would that look like, and how do we communicate that to our employees? And it's become one of the top levers for people to stay at your business, and yet the majority of people aren't measuring it. So that's really interesting that HBR is always like 2 years behind what's actually happening in the marketplace because they're an educational institution. But I think that's right. Like, people are starting to realize if we don't have a system around measuring culture, the culture is whatever happens that day. So that's really fascinating. As you go in and you're starting to assess these businesses, what are some themes or areas you've come up on again and again and again on creating a good culture or creating positive momentum? What are some things that you could share?
So what's interesting about where we start is we do a full, what I call culture assessment, and that's a series of steps. So we do a full survey that we've built based on our 9, what we call culture tenets. So those are everything from, are your mission and values clear? Do you have a unified purpose? Do you have trustworthy leadership, effective communication, that type of thing? So we're asking quantitative questions in that survey and a bit of qualitative. Then we use that survey as the jumping off point. Basically what I'll say is that we found the hot spots. And so then I do one-to-one interviews with executives, and then I do focus groups across the organization. And then we actually also look at documents. So if you're sending out communications, you have HR policies, you have programs, the way you talk about your goals. We sit back and look at all of that in a macro analysis because we're curious. I talk about it as you have a complicated game of telephone in your organization. So if in this hotspot, leaders say this is important and that they're really hooked into this, and I never hear it in focus groups, that says something. Mm-hmm. Or if I bring it up in focus groups and they go, yeah, we know that's really important to them, but like what we really care about is this. So the very first step on some of that is just to get clear on what is the employee voice? What are they saying about culture that is getting in the way? We ask a lot of questions that say, where is your business going in the next 3 years? You describe it. So that tells us a ton. Do employees actually understand where you're going? Executives say it in one way. Employees often say it with very different words or completely, not opposite, but in a different lane than executives might. And so one of the things that we start to help executives to see is that how they're communicating. Often we walk in and people will say, oh my gosh, we communicate every way to Sunday. I have so many different modes of communication, and I don't know if they're working. There's usually this feeling of, I don't know that it's getting what it needs to. And we hear from employees that communication, not surprising, is one of the challenges. Often communication comes up. Sufficient communication around change, and change is managed well. Trustworthy leadership are some of the key pieces that people are connected to when they're saying, hey, this is an obstacle for us achieving our vision and mission. Probably secondarily to that is, what is the unified purpose? And so what's helpful to that is often leaders are surprised by trustworthy leadership or unified purpose. They're saying, gosh, our vision is clear. This is where we're headed. So you might have a great vision as an executive team, but the how is what people want to understand because they came for the mission. We work with great companies that have beautiful mission statements, and people in these culture assessments reflect on how powerful that is to why they stay. But then they're lost on, well, how is that mission happening and what's the action and how am I a part of it? Then we start to hook in communication, trustworthy leadership along the path. And ultimately what you're doing is, culture is really important for a lot of reasons, but to me the most important thing is that it's driving the business that you're after. So if employees are coming for the mission of why you exist, doesn't it make sense that they would want to be accelerating with you towards that vision because it's mission and action? So it actually is a byproduct benefit to your employees if you hook culture and business strategy together. Because if not, they feel like you're doing some events, you're giving them recognition, you're telling them, yay, you, and then we go work over here and it doesn't help the acceleration and the innovation together. And so that's some of the challenges that we see when we walk into organizations initially.
I love that. Why do you think companies struggle so much with culture? Is it just too many balls in the air and they're focused on other things, or not having the system? Like, why is it such a struggle? Because I'll say, when we recruit employees, and we hired, 20 something people last year, not one of them comes from a company that they're like, wow, this was so great, and I had a great leader and they treated me with dignity and they showed me the growth plan. And so it's really interesting. I think generally we have a lot of really bad cultures that no one's really willing to identify and say, hey, we've got to fix things. But why do we as business owners struggle with this concept so much?
I think largely because it's a concept. It's not something that people really have been able to break down. And even if you look at a bunch of the culture literature, great books on culture, different pieces and parts, it's hard to know how to translate that to your business. And so that's part of why we ask employees to say, we're trying to go here. What is the major obstacle? Leaders, what is the major obstacle? Because there is a systemic approach to that. So I do think that there's the nebulousness of culture itself, and knowing it's important but not knowing how. Most people come to me and they say, hey, I know that there's some culture issue that's making this business result not happen, but I don't know. And they're sort of open-handed, like, ugh. The complexity of human beings, I think, is also part of this. So, for instance, one of the clients that I'm working with right now, they have a gap in unified purpose. So the executive, I would say the very top executive is clear on how he is trying to move things forward. The rest of the executive team is clear that that's where we're going, but not sure how. And then as we cascade into the organization, people do not know how that their work contributes. And so what's interesting about that particular challenge is that we could go and build, here's the future vision. Here's even down to the distillation of here's what your role is, Heather, Chris, in moving this forward. But then I have a leader who can't hold accountability, who isn't good at accountability. I have another leader who can't communicate the upstream and downstream effects of what's going on. I have an employee that has a lot of tenure that wants to do it the old way. I have some new employees who are trying to bring innovative ideas and those get squashed. So now we have all the people dynamics around what is a relatively simple step forward if we put some intentionality around the education of the future vision and how to define it in individual groups. And that's, I think, what really stunts a lot of people. Some of the groups I'll come up with, you can tell it's almost like makes me think of those dystopian movies where you can see the infrastructure of the building, like they tried to have this happen or this sort of existed, but they couldn't figure out how to monopolize it and keep it going. And so this is often we see the structure of some tried attempts, but because of the complication of just how people really have different needs and different challenges, those pieces get really complicated for them to be able to understand. And the last thing I would say is it feels like it's this big. And people invariably struggle to prioritize anything, frankly. So we all, many of the organizations that I work with, and probably you've seen, they have 55 priorities and they think they're going to accomplish that in the next year. And people they just burn out or detach. So culture feels like the same way, I think, to people. So it's trying to get really clear on what is the lever for one step forward as part of the action plan for that overwhelm.
That's really good. I think the dystopian infrastructure is a really good visual. And one of the things that I've found useful is to be measuring in that 90-day cadence, which is part of life and EOS and that sort of thing, to be measuring your culture on a 90-day basis and your vision on a 90-day basis, because things do change. I mean, as you test and as you grow, you're like, man, we were this actually, and that served us when we were this size. But that core value and that mission actually, as big as we are and where we're going and as many people are involved, maybe isn't true anymore. And let's reframe it and actually bring it up to date. I think also, the culture and the vision and the mission, the market changes. COVID changed a lot of things where like you said, if you had a 5-year plan, there's no way to even think about that. And even now with tariffs and embargoes and a lot of things that have happened in the past 6 to 12 months, a lot of businesses that we're used to saying, hey, we kind of set it and forget it. We have this 2-year, 3-year plan. I'm coaching them to say, hey guys, you got to be looking at this like every week at least. And just a high level to say, hey, are we making a 1% correction and now we're back on course, or are we starting to get way off base? We've got an acquisition strategy within our family office that the environment changed dramatically on us. And instead of saying, hey, we're going to keep pursuing this strategy that's not working for the next 24 months, we just said, hey, it's time to reframe. What's going to work? Let's go find another industry or another niche that we know we can buy in that is still within alignment of what we're doing from a mission perspective. But we can't keep pursuing this thing that has changed that we have no control over. So I think measuring that culture hopefully will help you not have that dystopian infrastructure and you're keeping it at least somewhat healthy. That's why we love that measure small, measure often concept. Even with all your employees, like if you're checking in every week, they're going to, and you have that honesty and trust built, they're going to tell you. They might not tell you fully, but they're going to say, hey, this thing happened that I didn't really love. And it's like, okay. The other thing that I've really appreciated about the EOS process is hiring and firing and accountability based on culture and your core values. And a specific example is we have a core value of grit, which is really hard for people right now. I think COVID stripped grit out of most people and they're trying to rebuild it. But we've just said, hey guys, we expect you to show up every day and do your job and do it with excellence and not give up, right? That's all grit is like, hey, you're just going to be a little bit tougher than the person sitting next to you. And we had an employee that, professed grit when we hired him and seemed like he had a history of it. And in 4 weeks, basically just said, hey, this is a lot harder than I thought, and I'm going to go back to my easy thing. And I'm like, okay, that's totally fine. And we care about you and hope you do a great job. But it became so easy to gauge that for him and for us, because he knows, like, hey, and I always tell people, this is who we are and it's not changing. We're going to do this for the next 10 years. So if you hate this thing, accountability, service, grit, you will hate it for 10 years. So it makes it a lot easier for people to select in and out very quickly and say, oh yeah, this is what I've been looking for. This is terrible and I don't want this.
A question that we love to ask our potential clients is, do you know what your business is worth? And if you sold your business today, would it fulfill your personal and financial goals? If you're a successful business owner, but you don't know when or how to sell your business, and if you've ever wondered what each additional day in your business is actually costing you, we'd love to chat. If you're ready to spend more time with your family, your friends, or traveling, come sit down with our team, because when you work with exceptional business advisors, we'll help you build a blueprint to sell your business successfully and help you create, capture, and achieve your dream life. Don't wait for the right time. The time's now. Go ahead and scan the QR code or book a discovery appointment at excoadvisors.com.
Cool. Share a story about one of the culture shift successes you've had that you're just like, this was really fun to journey with this business and they did these great things and now they've got this outcome.
Yeah, I actually have two, so I'm going to break your rule and try and do two in the amount of time you were expecting one. One is an agriculture client in Texas, and this is a company that's been around for 75 years. And when I met with the CEO, he was exhausted. He had been CEO, I think at the time, for about 7 or 8 years. And when we met, he said, similar to what I mentioned earlier, we're trying ahead. We have to change this part of our business. And I know culture is part of it. A little bit later in our conversation, he said, Heather, I really gave a big new vision of this service area and this way we were going to focus on, probably 6 or 9 months before he and I had our first conversation. And he said, he used this really lovely Band of Brothers quotes. And then he was saying, we're going to get out of the trenches and go together. And he said, then a couple of months later, I looked behind me and no one was following. And it was just this honest, stuck moment of passion towards the business, care about the people, and not sure how to make it all happen. And so as one individual, I watched a lot of change in him. And so as the organization, what they were going after was hearing what the employees and the leaders said was needed, a variety of different things, leadership skills, communication, and unified purpose, I think, were some of the key foundational pieces that they recognized they needed. The unified purpose was partly because a lot of long-term employees disagreed with where he and the board felt like they needed to go. And so it took some time for him to communicate, for the leadership team. We also had the leadership team come alongside him. He really was the person that everybody was kind of faulting and saying, this isn't okay. And so we shifted the way that leaders showed up and shared messages in a unified way. Here's my perspective, and what does championing look like for this way that we're stepping forward? They started asking mid-level leaders, hey, we're moving here. What are our obstacles? What are you worried about? And they listened and they learned and they paid attention. Was it a beautiful, perfect line to they actually improved? We look at Net Promoter Score and Employee Net Promoter Score as part of our survey. That's an important measure for us. And that particular company I was looking this morning, they improved 11 points. And our engagement ended when they were at 26, which is in the good, almost great category. We're usually looking from 25 to 35 is where we want to have you landed before you can hold some things on your own. My favorite part of that was leaders started to say, thank you. I feel like I know what I'm supposed to do. I feel like I know I'm getting more information. So the lift of leaders is an organic impact to those employees. And then ultimately that CEO was a lot less stressed. He felt like that he had a plan of action, that he knew what to do on the variety of different things. The other group that comes to mind is wildly different. They're a renewable energy company in Northern California, and they branched off from a previous company, and so had a little bit of startup, but a lot of kind of background in the way that they did work because of them being a part of another. They've grown from 23 employees to 85 employees, and they've been more proactive about culture. The COO told me when we very first started meeting, I know I want this. I know I need it to be there as a competitive advantage. I'm not sure how to do it, but we're willing to put the energy in. And that's been we're in the 5th year, I think, of this growth trajectory that they've been on. And to your point, we've built some things and then we've pivoted based on where the organization has gone. They're going through a lot of major changes in their organization because of industry, and we're listening and learning and trying to adjust. And they do all the things. They do stay interviews. They do these incredible offsites. They spend time with their leadership team building skills and talking about, and their structure is different because they don't have this 75-year run and kind of concrete measures and all of this. It's very innovative. They're the kind of on the cusp of the people in their industry. And so it's been interesting to watch. Their NPS score is in the 80s last year.
Wow.
I mean, I triple checked the data that it was right because I was thought, whoa, that's wild. So their challenge is sustaining that amidst all the SWOT analysis is pretty tough for them this year. And so we're continuing to talk with employees and understand. But I think it's been really fun to see where leaders can figure out how to retrofit maybe the culture that they hadn't been paying attention to, and also leaders that are recognizing it's important and wanting to build it as they go, because there's benefit. And really, I think a lot of maybe ease sounds like maybe too heavy of a word because you think, oh, it's going to be easy. That's not what I mean. But it reduces some of the noise and the overwhelm and complication when you do have a plan of action towards that going forward.
That's so wonderful. I want to touch on something that just came out of that I think is really interesting. So what happens, Heather, when you build an incredible culture and you're just in the wrong opportunity? Because that's exactly right. Like, renewables are out the window. A lot of the projects have failed. I just saw a multi-billion-dollar solar project that basically they mothballed. And so if you've built this fighting unit that has got respect and trust and loyalty and knows how to problem solve, what do you do next when the opportunity changes on you and you don't have any control?
Well, I think where you were talking about the dynamism of culture is really important here, because it's really, where's your business going and how does culture need to adjust to accelerate and feel that it's really upholding where the business is headed. So I would say in this scenario, I'd use that same mentality. Okay, well, where are we going as a business? Are we pivoting in completely? Are we waiting? Are we exploring new projects? What are we doing? When we make that decision, then we can say, okay, well, if we're going to explore these completely different things outside of our wheelhouse, how do we help employees and leaders are they equipped to be able to pivot that way? Do they have the same passion and interest that we do around this wildly new idea? And if not, what does it look like for us to inspire them, to equip them, right? A lot of times businesses will shift and start running. It's kind of like the example I gave. They start running this direction, and then they look back and they're like, wait a minute, we were excited. Where are you? And so employees, I think especially right now, as difficult as the environment is around all of us, part of the challenge is that we're going to step this direction. How are you? Where are you? What do you need? We want you to be a part of this. Help us to figure out what the steps are together. And so rather than a part of the leadership team or the leadership team just sort of tugging and saying, ready, go, because the uncertainty that brings to an employee is overwhelming. And especially if the agility needed or the resilience that many of us are struggling with just because life is hard, figuring out how to do that in community could be a really powerful benefit to that employee group. So I think it's contingent on, where are you shifting? What's the gap analysis really of the readiness of our employees? I'm approaching it almost like a change management project, which I don't mean to make that simpler than it is, because what you're talking about is wildly complicated. But then to think about, all right, how do we step into that gap to close it a bit more intentionally with the partnership and help of employees and leaders? You think about just the teamness mentality. When like a sports team has had a really bad run, a couple of different, and this is a lot less complicated than what you're talking about too, but they are mistakes after mistakes, and this isn't going well, and their star player, right, all the things. Those movies that we all love to watch is this moment of pivot. But it's not pivot where the coach says, by golly, we're going to go win this tomorrow. And everybody just goes, yeah, because they're exhausted and they're not sure how to do it and nobody's playing their roles appropriately. It's a moment of kind of re-grounding in who we are, what we're doing. And then they usually put their heads together and figure out. And then some lovely kind of rookie, usually kind of takes the star seat and everything pivots a bit. So you're looking for a moment like that or a strategy like that to be able to inspire, but also to say, like, where are we hurting? What can we do about that? And we may not be able to fix it all, but how do we rally around it to get some momentum?
That's great. I think too, hopefully with positive culture, we've got a friend, Rob, and he talks about the OODA loop, but we have a different acronym, ALA, Act, Learn, Adjust. With the right positive culture and communication and systems and processes, you're able to just pivot very quickly. And I'll give an example. I'm a partner in an oil and gas company that is just tremendous culture and amazing people. And we realized last year we are very good at upstream development, putting projects together, drilling wells, doing that whole thing. And we said, hey, actually the piece that we need to be better than anybody else at is managing capital. And so we made a very decisive action in one of our annual planning sessions to say, hey, we will be the greatest direct investment manager of oil and gas assets in the country. That's where we're going now. And so that was very tough if you're an engineer or a technical expert on our team that's like, well, I do this thing. I drill wells or I produce wells or this sort of thing. And so to be able to communicate that, and we're still in that phase to say, no, we still do those things with excellence. But for us to do that really well, we actually need to have control of our capital, the speed of capital, the cost of capital, how we deploy it. And so that's the thing that we need to be good at to be able to do this other bigger thing. And within our family office, we had to reshift just kind of a high level mental model. And what I came up with was we are a company of innovation. Like, we innovate. And so the things we do will change as the market changes, as everything changes, the economy. We're going to be in a position where we're going to innovate. We're going to say, hey, this will serve our clients really well. Let's build a business around that. This is a great acquisition opportunity. Let's go buy those things and get educated to do those things. And that's tough because now you have to, be able to communicate and say, hey, we were pursuing this thing for 12 months. It's not working. We're an innovation company. We need to innovate in this situation. What are we doing next? And then hopefully, like you said, you're bringing people along. And I agree with you. Like, you've got to give people pieces, like bites of it. Because I'm a high vision guy, and oftentimes I'll come in and be like, we're doing this new thing. And everybody's like, okay, why and how and what? And so I've actually said this year, I'm guarding some of the things that I have, and I'm not sharing fully, like, hey, this is where I know we're going to be in 10 years, because it just freaks people out, which means I haven't done a good job of communicating it, right? So that's really good. Okay, so we've got about 5 to 10 more minutes. I want to hear, what's some bad advice that you hear consistently around culture? It could be within some of the companies that you're coaching or out in social media. What's just some themes that you're hearing that you're like, this is just not true, it's not useful, and I'm hearing it a lot?
Yeah, I think that it's that, culture matters and communicate culture matters and talk about culture. Unless you actually, so that's a little bit about that HBR article. It's not communication, it's a system, right? You have to actually walk the walk. And when you're saying all these things and talking about how important it is, what's interesting is that if you can, often when I very first start with leadership teams, they'll ask, hey, do we need a culture statement? And I call those a true north culture statement. My advice is you can build one now, but actually you need to learn better about what culture means for your organization first. And sometimes that's a year plus in to then actually be able to define and say, and sometimes they want to say that statement to employees, and sometimes that's just for them to make decisions on. But ultimately, if we start, kind of sharing out where we want to work on culture and here's what culture is going to be, when you don't know if that's actually what employees see as the challenge, and then two, you're not 100% sure that you even know that that's what's going to drive the business results that you're after, people start to see through it really quickly. I think another piece too is if we start running with one executive that is really passionate about this and the other executives are not on board, the misalignment and the lack of championing and the aligned mindset is one of the most catastrophic things that can happen. Especially if you go out and survey everybody and ask for their feedback, and then you see that the executive team is going all these different directions. and you're passionate about it as an employee, but you're 1-up, 3-up leader, like it doesn't ever come up in conversation. And so you're like, yeah, okay, so we're using this as a campaign. And so what we want, often when I walk into organizations on that Net Promoter Score, they're usually at like a -30. That's about where we start. Yeah. And so a lot of the mindset around that is people are in their fight or flight brain. They are not in a place that says, we want to invite you into a room to be creative and innovative. I have to shift literally my brain, area of focus up here. I have to get out of my amygdala and up into frontal lobe to be able to have critical thinking, creativity. I can't do that unless I feel psychologically safe, that I understand what's expected of me, that some of the noise in my brain calms down. And I think that's also part of the challenge, is that when you decide culture matters, you're ready to bring people in and then it falls flat. Or you're going to have a culture of accountability and you start putting that in front of people and they balk at it and you're like, wait a minute, but this is good. I don't understand. So the fits and starts, I think, of going after culture, but not doing it in a systemic way that is hearing employee voice, being thoughtful about what the priority is. Employees actually, we see after the culture survey about 3 months to 6 months later, we see that retention starts to plateau a bit. So if it's been falling, it kind of hangs because employees are listening. They're like, there's a little bit different. Does that mean we have to change 15 things at once? No, we can change one and communicate about why we're trying this, where this is going, what we hope to achieve. Tell us if we're not on track. People start to say, wow, the experience of this is different. Not necessarily that culture is changing or even that program I love, but the way they're interacting with me is different. So I think the myths about culture are a variety of things. One would be that, hey, let's communicate a bunch about it and it will become. Let us really jump into the far pool of where we want to be and start operating like that, because people put walls up and they just won't move with you. And then I think the third is that thinking that you can plan a culture and start, even if you start in small steps, but you don't ever ask for feedback and be able to mitigate and have employees to give feedback and pilot and test things, you're gonna be exhausted. And so pretty soon into your culture journey, you just abandon ship and say, well, I don't know how to do that, or they don't care, and we're just gonna do this thing. And it really creates a lot of bitterness, which is a pretty difficult outcome to see.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, so I've got 2 closing questions, but before we get there, Heather, where can people find you? If somebody listens to this and they want to engage you or just brainstorm with you, what's the best way for somebody to connect with you?
So there's 2 places. One is our website, talentelevated.org. That's where you can set up a conversation time with me, which would be a great opportunity for us to just hear what you're thinking about culture, for me to be able to ask you some good questions, do a little coaching in that moment, and try and help figure out what you need to go next. The other place is LinkedIn is our primary social media platform, and we educate throughout the week. There's videos from me, there's thoughtful things from me, there's tidbits, there's practical approaches. One of the things that's my passion is making culture in practical steps. And so through LinkedIn and through our website, we have insight articles, videos, and practical tips. And that would be where I would say, hands down, I'd love for you to join me in that, because we're taking topics that we're hearing from our clients as a challenge, and that becomes our theme for a future quarter. And we're building out and talking about, well, this is what people are seeing, and this is what they're experiencing, and here's how to move. So you can get it in some bite-sized pieces that way.
That's really good. Okay, so 2 questions. One, if you could share just one tool, resource, podcast, mental model, something that in the past 6 months has been the highest lever for you, the highest change maker, what would that be? And the second is, what's a word of encouragement? We're really just ending with words of encouragement. We've had a lot of mental health issues with folks that we love, folks on our team. And I'm just trying to really reframe the positivity and the big opportunity that we have before us going into next year.
Yeah. Well, you've already let the cat out of the bag of the tool that I plan to share, but it's the book Traction by Gino Wickman, because when I was asking you a couple of months ago, as an entrepreneur and a business owner who was planned to be a corporate gal and didn't prepare for this, I didn't do a bunch of leadership learning or entrepreneurial learning, and I really worried that I didn't know what I didn't know. That was what I asked you. How do I know that I'm doing it all right? How do I know that I have all the pieces? And that was the big question that I was carrying around for months, because I thought I was okay and I knew a bunch of things that I should be doing, but I wasn't sure if I had them all. And EOS has been really helpful for me to be able to break it down and really to look at things and be like, well, I knew I should be doing that and I'm not. Or thank you for validating that I am doing that. And so just working that plan has been very helpful. Some of my clients actually use EOS and some are more successful at actually implementing that and keeping it implemented than others. But that's been wildly helpful for me to give me peace of mind that I do have the things in place or I know what to do next. And then the word of encouragement that I would say is that invoke curiosity. One of the things I coach these leaders on that we're working with in our client base is if they're frustrated about an employee and they can't get things moving forward with this executive, a variety of different things, they're not working. I think there's a joy in finding your curiosity again. I think it brings out the little kid in us a little bit to explore, wonder what's going on. Not in I have to go find out what's going on. I wonder what's happening. Tell me more about that. It centers you, it makes you soften, and you learn a lot, which really pulls and shifts your own fight or flight from back here up into the space of imagination and critical thinking. And it doesn't solve all the problems, but it brings you to a place where you can see problems differently.
I love that. Invoke curiosity. That's such a good theme. Heather, thank you so much for coming on the show, and we'll have to do this again shortly, but we'll see you on down the road.
Thanks, Chris.
Thanks for joining us this week on the Exceptional Companies Podcast. Make sure to subscribe to the show on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, or via RSS so you'll never miss a show. While you're at it, if you found value in this show, we'd appreciate a rating on iTunes, or if you'd simply tell a friend about the show, that would help us out too. If you like this show, please reach out through our website, www.excoadvisors.com, for free tools to order a copy of Selling Main Street or to sign up for our free webinar on how to sell your Main Street business.